All right, how's it going, everyone? Triple T with a long overdue video yet again. I'm recording this before our second pre-comp of second year. I was going to get it done before the first main comp, but construction people came into the SGA office. Uzair was with me. Actually, we heard these beeping noises going off. They leave, and then the next thing you know, you hear all these drilling, this construction noise, and I turn around to him, and I'm just like, this isn't going to work. I was high-key salty. But anyway, the point is that I'm evaluating this last semester independently of what I'm currently enduring. To those of you watching this who are in my class, I hope my experiences resonate with yours. If not, I'd love to hear about them in the comments section. If any of you are ever interested in sharing your medical school journey with any of us, then let me know. I'd be very happy to give you a platform to voice yourself. Going into the second semester, I'd say that I was less confident going into the first, although I will note that I had a strong conviction that I was going to pass either way. What changed for me was my expectations as to how well I was going to perform. I thought way too highly of myself going into my first semester. I thought I'd get honors just given my track record in undergrad and how I did on my MCAT, but the difficulty of medical school exams blindsided me, and I have to admit my classmates are much harder than I ever imagined. It's not just me. We also started with neurology, which is classically considered the hardest system. I do have my disagreements with that statement now, which I'll speak of later, but my reservations about the spring semester in general were very justified in retrospect. It tells me that my first semester has grounded me for the second one. It was very needed as it returned me to a reality of the current limits of my intelligence. Many times I've heard people say that the first semester medical school is the hardest. I personally disagree with this common statement. There are unique challenges that come with first semester, I can't deny. It's a fresh start, like reestablishing your social networks, even if you come from a large state school. Even though you're expecting the workload to be a lot, it's just like, oh wow, I didn't realize it was going to be that much. We had to complete all of gross anatomy alongside of lecture. Despite these differences, I did notice a stark increase in the difficulty of the lecture material, and it did reflect across performance benchmarks as a whole. And this held true even with having these different ways that we learned to study and having more time between pre-comps, we still had this small drop-off. And I even felt much more comfortable first semester compared to the second with OMK. I am not going to discredit people's opinions about the first semester being the hardest, but I do believe that perpetuating this idea of, oh, first semester is the hardest, it can have detrimental implications on people's mentalities because let's say that they do well. It's just like, oh, that was pretty okay. They go into second semester. What if they have trouble? It's almost like they're going to be disillusioned. Like, what am I supposed to believe? And so that being said, I believe that the best way to approach each semester is just to say that they're all going to be similarly challenging, but different types of challenges, unique challenges. I'm interested to come back to this video in spring of 2025 and see how this holds up. Speaking of studying strategies, I found that mine have definitely evolved since I've started medical school. I might have found what works for me and may work for me for the next year pre-clinical. So originally, I was just straight up transcribing lectures in their entirety, but I found to be very, very cumbersome and tedious. I was doing it because I was afraid, what if I miss something and they test me on it? But once I learned to match the lecturer's words to section objectives and only transcribe accordingly, it significantly reduced my time transcribing, and I had a larger buffer between studying and exams. I also did not rely heavily on third-party materials for lectures in first semester, but come the spring, I used a lot of Bootcamp, Scholar, RX, and TrueLearn to study. The lectures were more of a first pass on material. Once I did enough third-party, I looked back at my notes and review was not really covered in depth by the outside sources. My strategy was much more efficient than my old one, and I don't think I would have passed the spring semester if I didn't adapt accordingly. the volume of material would have overwhelmed me to the point of non-retention. Because even with these transcribing session objectives, there were still several lectures where I have like 7 or 8 pages of notes. So just imagine if I didn't go about it that way. The transition into second semester opened up to a systems-based curriculum. We started with neurology. I found that the first half of that material, essentially first block, was easily the most interesting of everything that I've learned in medical school until that point, even up until the end of that semester. A lot of it required application, which is something that I particularly excel at. For example, determining deficits exhibited by a patient according to the location of their lesion. It really required me to think and understand while applying what I learned about the different ascending, descending tracks. For some reason, the basal ganglia lecture was one of my favorites. The direct and indirect pathways remind me of logic gates, which made them like a fun puzzle for me, but I don't know, maybe there's something a little off about me. Just a little. Anyway, there is a learning curve in neurology, but that I would say that it added to my enjoyment and satisfaction in getting as close to mastery as I could. Even something like memorizing the nuclei was somewhat enjoyable for me, even though I absolutely disdain rote memorization in general. We did also have neuroanatomy in our first semester. It wasn't bad at all. I didn't mind learning it, and the difficulty was very reasonable. The class did very well on the comp as a whole, too. I was okay with the second half of neuro, but it didn't have that steep learning curve, so I didn't really feel that same satisfaction as I did in the first block. There was also an overwhelming amount of pharmacology. I actually rewatched my fall 2023 reflection and realized that I really enjoyed pharmacology a lot. It was actually my favorite block/unit in first semester, but that didn't age too well. I found that I liked pharm sprinkled in for a few units, but when there are too many drugs to memorize and learn, it just kind of gets tedious, to be honest. After neurology, we had psychiatry. I really don't have much to say about it, to be honest. It was a very short unit. It was also considerably easier than most of what I learned in my first academic year. There were some gray areas in the differential diagnoses of some diseases, or at least it seemed that way based on how some of the exam questions were written, but it was very simple, and conceptually, it was pretty enjoyable. Just really don't have much to say about it, to be honest. Following Psych was musculoskeletal. This is when the burnout came. Admittedly, I made a terrible mistake. We had spring break after finishing all of Block 2, and I didn't fully unwind. I completed half of the lectures for the following week. There were like 15 of them. I was just like, oh my god, I don't want to sit through all that in 1 week. I need to get ahead. I don't want to, I need to. I should have just stuck to playing Devil May Cry. Anyway, I expected to enjoy this unit a lot more. I'm not too far off from the stereotype of the gym bro. Unfortunately, the unit did not live up to my expectations. It felt like I was memorizing the things I need to know, not really understanding it. As I was saying earlier, part of my enjoyment of material comes from synthesizing knowledge based on the smaller details. I could not maximize my experience in this matter, so the unit for me really slogged along. I also didn't really find what we were learning to be particularly interesting, but surprisingly, it didn't take away from my interest in PM&R. It's either my number 1 or my number 2 specialty at this time. Lastly, we had hematology and immunology. Immuno was easily my least favorite unit that we'd covered that semester, and arguably for the whole entire academic year. It felt like this alphabet soup of inflammatory mediators. I've been rather clear on my stance on memorization, and so why'd you have to make me really burned out on top of this? I was also scratching my head at why we had like 3 lectures on anaphylaxis. They weren't the most interesting, and we had 3 of them, so I was really waiting for each of them to end, personally. When it came to the heme stuff, I actually really liked it, even through all of the burnout. With my understanding of the clotting cascade, a good amount of the information actually logically followed through it, especially with the pharmacology. I did like the pharm for heme, personally. And Dr. Plummer did a really good job preparing us for boards given what she taught us, like those leukemia lectures. Mwah. Anyway, if I were more confident behind the microscope and I didn't feel such a strong drive towards patient interaction, maybe hematology would have been an excellent field for me, but I'm too much of a people person. I guess it is what it is. We also had plenty of OMM throughout the spring semester. I didn't like it as much as the first, to be honest. Part of the reason was the pacing. So there were some labs in which we had plenty of time left over at the end, and we didn't really feel inclined to use this time to review old techniques. I am looking at you, Sacral MET. We split it in two. So the first lab, we only did literally two techniques. And then because of this, in the last block, we had lower extremity diagnosis and counterstrain all in one session. It was very rushed and we ran out of time. With how intense this material is and how much of it there is, I felt that this should have been split into two labs, and sacral stuff, MET, and counterstrain all should have been in one. So because of this, going into the last comp, I felt that I had to learn everything from scratch because I couldn't properly grasp the fundamentals of lower extremity stuff. I also think that I enjoyed the units much better in my first semester, like cervical HVLA, lumbar HVLA, they were my favorite treatments. Still are. My highest point in spring 2024 was on April Fool's Day. The day before, I did a walk in the neighborhood and recorded the YouTube video for that day. I was very excited to prank everybody. It really surprised me that so many people actually believed me when I told them I was finishing that year, then dropping out of med school to join the USC. Must speak volumes about my talent. Anyway, what got me the most, though, was there were people in GroupMe saying they were really sad to see me go, and I'm responding to them like they're in on the joke, but I talked to them later, and they're just like, no, we actually thought that you were leaving. One of my friends even ran up to me. I told her I was joking. She's just like, I thought you were actually leaving. It was too good. Anyway, we also had the SGA election that day, so I made sure to capitalize on the moment. So I opened the speech by telling everyone that I came there to tell them that I wasn't running for SGA secretary because I had to prepare for my UFC debut. I must have thought that I was preparing for my comedy skit at the Taste of Nations event. Anyway, it was a day full of laughs, and I got elected. It was a very tough election considering my opponent was a liar and could not be trusted. I'm just kidding, I was unopposed. Anyway, I intend on making SGA videos in the future, and I'm sure that you all will love them. In my first reflection, I felt too uncomfortable to disclose my lowest point. It was too vulnerable for my liking, especially to say on camera, but for this reflection, it's rather obvious and not as personal for me. I would say that, without a doubt, my low point came from the onset of symptoms from a tear in my acetabular labrum. I don't want to give away all the details because I want to do a case vignette video eventually, but I will say that it stopped me from participating actively in Rocksteady Boxing, which is something that had really given me a lot of my sense of belonging and even gave me energy in the morning. I just wasn't the same after that. You can say that I spent half the semester with a condition that impeded my ADLs. I wasn't the same person after that, especially with the stress accumulating, and there was no proper release for it. Like, no kicking the bags at boxing. I'm still sorry, Dave. I'm still paying my pen and stuffing the new one. But no wonder I became a metalhead after how stressful that semester was. Overall, my second semester wasn't as enjoyable as the first. I don't think it had much to do with the novelty of medical school wearing off. I still loved all my classmates and still do at the time of this video. The injury and burnout really destroyed my sense of enjoyment of the semester. There was also that artificial spike in difficulty in OMM, which probably contributed. I felt like I was barely breathing for air in my last block. And I feel like it could have been avoidable if OMM were structured a little bit better. just having that lower extremity crammed in, that really made it a lot more stressful than it needed to be. Overall, I would give the second semester of medical school a 5 out of 10. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed already and you enjoyed the video, then come and follow my medical school journey. Triple T, out.